Good evening. Thank you for coming to tonight's program. My name is Isabella Wood, and I'm an intern at the Jefferson Educational Society. And it is my pleasure to kick off tonight's event. Before we begin, some housekeeping. If you need assistance during the event, please find one of our volunteers who will be happy to help you, me, and then them in the back. Reminders for the Q&A portion, please speak loudly and clearly when asking your question, as there are no microphones at this location. Also, please keep your questions brief and concise and refrain from offering lengthy statements. And now for our upcoming events this week. Thursday, Brian Slawin will be presenting Future Makers, How Every Community Member Can Build What Comes Next at the Erie Center for Arts and Technology at 6 p.m. We have on Monday at 12 p.m. Seth Trott will be at the JES presenting Building the Presque Isle Neighborhood Network, a working blueprint for sparking organizations. And finally, next Tuesday at 6 p.m., Dr. Lee Williams will be presenting Work in the Age of AI, What's Changing, What's Not, and What Matters Most. Lastly, I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Andrew Roth is a current JES scholar in residence. He's involved with the JES Civic Leadership Academy. Dr. Roth's research ranges from The American Story, What Binds Us Together as Americans, to On Leadership Towards a Practical Theory of Leadership. He is also the author of How to Be a Highly Effective Leader, a primer. And Dr. Roth has served as president of St. Bonaventure University and president of Notre Dame College until his retirement in 2014. Prior to this, he served at Mercyhurst University for almost 30 years. Besides his various projects, Dr. Roth enjoys spending time with his wife Judy and their 3 children and 7 grandchildren. Please join me in giving Dr. Andrew Roth a JES welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to turn the volume back up ever so slightly. Well, thank you, and thank you for coming on a beautiful, wasn't so beautiful earlier today, but on a beautiful summer day. We're going to talk tonight a little bit about American holidays in general, a great deal about what I call America's freedom holidays. This program, American Holidays, is a subset of a much larger set of programs that I've been doing since roughly 2018. And I give them the umbrella label of the American Tapestry Project, which is also a podcast on WQLN. I think it now airs on the second Sunday of every month at 1 p.m., but it's actually really designed for the podcast audience. You can find the current episode and most of the past episodes on WQLN's website. And I think Spotify and Apple Podcasts have probably the largest and most complete of all 60 episodes. I'm not so sure they have all 60, but they have most of them. In any event, the American Tapestry Project is a project I've been working on, trying to arrive at some understanding of what's the story of America, or what's the American story. What would Americans tell you America is all about if you were to ask them? And as it turns out, I landed on the metaphor tapestry, because if you were to ask the proverbial person in the street, what's the story of America, depending where you are, you're going to get, and depending on who you ask, you're going to get a lot of different answers. The historian Joe Lepore says there's no such thing as the American story, there are American stories. I don't entirely agree with her. I think if you weave all of those stories together, hence the tapestry metaphor, you get a story, or you get an actual idea of what America is all about. In any event, the American Tapestry Project itself started about 8 or 9 years ago when I did a series at the Jefferson and then at Chautauqua and a number of other places around the country. America in 1968, there's always colons in academic stuff. America in 1968, the far side of the moon and the birth of the culture wars. That was the first thing. America, 1968, not so much America in 1968. 1968 turns out, and as I look around the room, not all of us, but many of us in the room actually lived through it. It was, in fact, would be one of the hinge years. If I'm not going to take up our time tonight, but if I were to say, what's the most important years in American history? 1619, 1621, the Pilgrims. Then you kind of jump to maybe 17 65, the Stamp Act, 17. I'm not going to go through the whole Rolodex, but whatever list you came up with, what are the 10 or 15 most important dates? 1968 would be probably the one in which you could say America changed. That's a hinge date. That then led to the larger Tapestry Project. We tell ourselves stories. Other parts of it include American holidays. You're going to hear tonight, because it's summertime, and during the summer we actually have the 3 or 4 most important freedom holidays, as I call them: Memorial Day, Juneteenth, July 4th, and although it's not in the summer, I link it with Memorial Day, Veterans Day, or Armistice Day as it was once known. But the American Holidays Project starts with the history of Valentine's Day, which has nothing, well, it has a great deal to do with America, because that was an entirely important thing in the early 19th century. Most people don't realize that that was the great gift-giving day, not Christmas. It was also the beginning of the greeting card industry, which was created by a woman named Esther Howland in Worcester, Massachusetts. So to give Esther her place in history, she got kind of eclipsed by Hallmark. But interestingly enough, if you want to see the Hallmark, if you want to see the collection of Esther Howland greeting cards, you have to go to the Hallmark Museum in Kansas City. American holidays, and then we go from Valentine's Day to ethnic holidays. I use St. Patrick's Day, but also any number of others. Mother's Day. We then end up with harvest holidays and end up with what I call the American way of Christmas, which was actually, most people are surprised to hear this. They tend to think of Christmas as an ancient celebration. The way you celebrate Christmas in America was essentially created in the early and middle 19th century intentionally by a group of people trying to create a common culture. That's an interesting story. Then I talk about Americans and their games. That's another 5-part series. The birth of the women's movement is a series that's ongoing, and lately, the last year or so, I've been doing a history of American pop, the story of American popular music as a lens or a window into the soul of America and how America and what it thinks of itself and how it thinks of itself. And you can find all of those, there's about 7 of them now, on QLM's website and on Spotify. But that's not what we're here for tonight. We're here tonight to talk about American holidays. So how many holidays do Americans observe? Anybody have a guess? Well, this isn't exactly a scientific number, but I took it off a timeanddate.calendar or something like that, timeanddate.com, the calendar website, and it lists, if I counted correctly, 256 American holidays. Americans love holidays. So we're going to talk about, as I said earlier, 3 or 4 that I classify as America's freedom holidays and celebrating freedom. But before we do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about those 256 holidays and what buckets they fall into. Tonight, we're going to talk about Memorial Day, as I said, which also once upon a time had another name. Juneteenth, the newest national holiday, although itself it's a very old holiday, 152 years. Independence Day and July 4th, which is another one that has 2 names. And then we'll end up with looking at 2 or 3 the most famous patriotic songs in American culture. So the question is, what about those 256 holidays? Holidays come in 6 big buckets. They come in 2 classifications. They're either observances or official holidays. That's 2. And then they're either local, state, or national. What's an observance? An observance is something that a town, village, county, state, or the national government observes, but has not declared an official holiday, and everybody still has to go to work and the banks are open, et cetera, et cetera. An official holiday is either, can be, interestingly enough, there are some local and state official holidays. This is one. Official holidays is central government offices close, post offices are closed, people get the day. Not all people, it becomes a matter of employer discretion up to a point. They get the day off, but all government offices are closed and usually banks and post offices. Amongst local holidays, One of the oldest is Evacuation Day. Anybody know what that is? Must.
Yeah, when the British left New York Harbor and all the prison ships that were there.
That's basically right, the wrong location. It's Boston Harbor. Evacuation Day was March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, interestingly enough. March 17th, 1776, and it's the day the British left, having occupied Boston for a year and a half. Henry Knox had brought the cannon from Ticonderoga across Massachusetts, put them on the Dorchester Heights, and when the British saw the cannons on the Dorchester Heights, they left. They knew they were literally, not figuratively, literally sitting ducks. And they had no choice but to leave. Actually, that's probably one of the most incredible feats in American history, because there was no I-90. In fact, there were no roads. Knox and a group went to Fort Ticonderoga in New York State on Lake Champlain, defeated the British garrison there, stole the cannon, and then dragged them back across Massachusetts to Boston. And when the British saw that, they left. In any event, Evacuation Day is an official holiday in Boston, the city of Boston, and in Suffolk County, Massachusetts. It became an official holiday. It was observed for the first time sometime in the middle of the 19th century, became an official holiday in don't hold me to this exact number, 1934 or so. And because it overlaps with St. Patrick's Day, it was actually the Irish American Society that became its great advocates. And the actual state act that implemented it was signed in blue and green because it was St. Patrick's Day. But Evacuation Day would be an example of a local holiday. State observances, actually, I knew somebody, I assumed that someone had asked me today, what are Pennsylvania observances? And I went on the state of Pennsylvania's website. I went everywhere I could find. Apparently, we don't have any observances in Pennsylvania. So if...
Groundhog Day. Groundhog.
That would be one. Actually, I have Groundhog Day. That's a national holiday, though. That's not a Pennsylvania thing, although it's occurred. And actually, if you came to the groundhog lecture, you'd see why I didn't include it, because there are 7 or 8 other groundhogs, including Staten Island Buckeye Chuck, Staten Island Sam. No, Sam's in Nova Scotia. I think Staten Island Chuck. There are 7 or 8 groundhogs. State observances, individual states have their own list of them. This is just a smattering. They usually, interestingly enough, come around and are focused on some of the things that divide us to this day. They either celebrate Americans who stood up. I'm going to talk about this when we get to the July 4th. They either celebrate people who stood up for what I call creedal America, people who believe in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, or people who have rejected it. And you see that kind of on this page. Bunker Hill Day is a little bit different, but Jefferson Davis did not agree with the creedal vision of America, but Rosa Parks, I assume most people in the room know who she is. Elizabeth Peretrovich Day in Alaska, she was an indigenous, she married, obviously, someone who was not an indigenous person, but she is an indigenous person, and she is responsible for the first civil rights law ever passed in the United States, when she demanded that indigenous Aleuts would be treated with the same rights and responsibilities as any other American citizen in Alaska. So Alaska has, on the 16th of February, Elizabeth Peretrovich Day. New York and a couple of other states have Susan B. Anthony Day. Emancipation Day is actually in Ohio. Another one, Kent State shootings. Statehood Day in Arizona. So state observances, and there's a laundry list of them. Some states have more. As far as I can tell, Pennsylvania doesn't have one, but I could well have missed something. But a state observance is, for some reason, the state chooses to acknowledge that. Official state holidays, and these, again, you see the historic divide. Virginia and Texas have Robert E. Lee Day, and that's an official holiday. Certain states, Mississippi and Alabama, for example, have Confederate Heroes Day, and those are holidays. The state government shuts down. People don't necessarily get a day off of work, but government shuts down. Yorktown Victory Day is self-explanatory. San Jacinto Day is the day the Texans defeated the Mexicans at the Battle of San Jacinto and declared their independence. And for a short term, literally several months. They were an independent republic before they agreed to join the Union with the United States, setting off the Mexican-American War. Seward's Day, the day of the purchase of Alaska, Vermont Town Meeting Day. So those are state holidays that are official holidays. Probably the most widely known official state holiday is Patriots' Day in Massachusetts. That's a state holiday, not a national holiday, and it celebrates or recognizes the Battle of Lexington and Concord and the beginning of the American Revolution. It is the day the Boston Marathon is run. The Boston Red Sox play a day game. Everything shuts down in Massachusetts. It's a big deal if you've ever been in Boston on that day. It is April 19th was the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Massachusetts finessed it a little bit. It always occurs on whatever Monday in April comes closest to the 19th. So they created their own 3-day weekend. That's probably, I'm going to guess that's probably the most well-known state holiday, at least certainly in the North and the Northeast. National observances, these are days the national government declares are of importance, but they are not holidays. People don't get days off. And again, you see the celebration of what I call Creedal America, Religious Freedom Day, 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, Women's Equality Day in August. I talk in the larger program about August is I should have asked the question. I just gave away the answer, but what's the only month that doesn't have a holiday? August. There are several religious holidays in August that are important, but there's no secular holiday in the month of August. My candidate would be Women's Equality Day on August 26th. And then, of course, there are official national holidays that are sponsored by the federal government, and for the most part, well, the government shuts down, most state governments shut down, post offices are closed, banks are closed, and on many of them, not all of them, everything closes, or almost everything closes. Actually, we live in so commercial a society anymore that I was actually surprised to discover that McDonald's was open on Christmas. Closed on Easter, though, interestingly enough, but there's very few times. In fact, I think Easter would be about the only time you would find any kind of unanimity and everything is closed. But there are 13 of them. There are 13 national holidays. New Year's Day is an official national holiday. The presidential inauguration is an official national holiday, although it only occurs every 4 years. Martin Luther King Day is an official national holiday. President's Day is an official national holiday. Memorial Day is an official national holiday. Juneteenth, as of 2021, is an official national holiday. 4th of July is obviously official national holiday. Labor Day is an official national holiday. Columbus Day is an official national holiday. So is Election Day, but that occurs every year. Veterans Day is an official national holiday. Thanksgiving is an official national holiday, and so is Christmas. So we have 13 national holidays. Most of them occur on Mondays because of the Uniform Holiday Act of 1968, which created 3-day weekends. We'll come back and talk a little bit about the Uniform National Holiday Act in a couple of other places. But not all of them do. Some of them fall on the date in which the date that it's given. Christmas is always on the 25th. Thanksgiving is always on the 4th Thursday in November. Veterans Day is always on November 11th. Juneteenth is always on June 19th. That's it. I mean, the July 4th is always July 4th. So, most of us who grew up in the North can remember a lot of chili picnics on May 30th because Memorial Day from 1868 till 1970 was always celebrated on May 30th. Then with the Uniform Holiday Act of 1968, creating 3-day weekends, it is now celebrated on the fourth Monday in May, whatever one that turns out to be. It used to be May 30th was the sacrosanct date. We'll come to why that is in a moment, or was, because it no longer is. Memorial Day, that's why I played taps. It's the day you remember veterans. It's the day dedicated primarily to deceased veterans who paid the ultimate sacrifice. Most people don't know that there's a national moment of silence that is supposed to occur every Memorial Day at 3 p.m. It actually is relatively new. It was created by President Clinton in the year 2000, and it was actually designed to put the memorial back in Memorial Day. There was a group of people who happened to be leading some school children through Lafayette Park, I think sometime in the middle 90s, and when then the docent or whoever asked the school children, what's Memorial Day? They said, that's the day the pools open. And so a group began to get together, go, no, wait a minute, we have to do something about it. And this group put together a national moment of silence. And it is at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in whatever time zone you're in. I try to acknowledge it. I'm not always good at that. Sometimes you get caught up in the days, and I think it's a concept or an idea that needs a little more attention. Memorial Day wasn't always called Memorial Day. What was it originally called? Decoration Day. I'm old enough to remember when the two were, I can remember my mother and other people using Decoration Day and Memorial Day interchangeably, as if, the same day. And where did the word or the phrase Decoration Day come from? Actually, no one knows. It is a custom that began spontaneously in different places around the country as the Civil War wound down. No one actually knows where the first Decoration Day occurred. It was a day in which widows and their children began the custom of putting flowers on the graves of the Civil War dead. And it would be their husband or brother or father or whomever. And that sprang up spontaneously. But no one actually knows where that happened. As a matter of fact, Americans have a genius. Actually, most of our I'm going to get into it a wee bit. Most of our polarization is the backwash from the Civil War. You tend to think, this is 2026, the Civil War ended 160 years ago, and you would think, but as William Faulkner famously said, the past isn't dead, it's not even past. Most of our issues to this day find their roots then. One of which is, who started Memorial Day? Well, in the North, the contenders are Gettysburg for the obvious reason, 1863, but Lincoln's dedication of the cemetery was actually considered a one-off, not the beginning of a national holiday. Boalsburg, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Waterloo, New York. If you were in the South, they will claim Warrenton, Virginia, and those dates are earlier. So no one actually knows when the first Memorial Day happened. But we do know this, that the first documented, not so much Memorial Day, occurred in Charleston, South Carolina on May 1st, 1865. Remember, the Civil War had ended 2 weeks before. Appomattox is April 15th, more or less. On May 1st, 1865, 3,000 freed children met in Washington, interesting name for the park, in Washington Park in Charleston, South Carolina, and they sang hymns, and then they marched to the cemetery where both Union and Confederate dead were buried intermingled, and they laid flowers on their graves and mourned what they called martyrs of the race curse. And that's probably as close as anyone can come to the first documented actual celebration. The official beginning of Memorial Day occurs in 1868 when General John Logan, who was the head of what well, today you would say he was the head of the VA. They didn't call it that then. But he was in charge of the Veterans Bureau of the department. And he declared that the 30th of May should be designated, and this is interesting, this is his exact declaration, for the purpose of strewing with flowers or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in defense of their country during the late rebellion. That sentence wouldn't play in the South, so Memorial Day was essentially a Northern holiday for much of its history, and whose bodies now lie in almost every city, village, and hamlet church in the land. And he declared May 30th because there was no significant battle associated with it. It was a date not associated with anything. The first official Memorial Day occurred on May 30th, 1868, with the dedication of Arlington National Cemetery. And of course, the backstory on Arlington National Cemetery is also the victorious North sticking their finger in the South's eye, because that was, most people in the room, I'm guessing, know that story. Arlington National Cemetery was Robert E. Lee's estate. And that he might never reclaim it, they buried the Union dead there. No one could ever give it back to him. The Custis Lee Mansion still exists. It's at the top of, if you're ever in Arlington Cemetery, it's at the crest of the highest point. But that was at the dedication of Arlington National Cemetery when James Garfield, representative from neighboring Ohio, who was later elected president and assassinated, well, you can read that as well as I can read. Veterans Day is a little different, and I include it here because they're the two dates on which we honor veterans. Veterans Day began in 1919 as Armistice Day on November 18th, acknowledging the end of World War I. It was made an official national holiday in 1938, but then, after World War II and the Korean War in 1954, President Eisenhower changed the name from Armistice Day to Veterans Day and made it an official national holiday. Veterans Day is actually one of those, is an interesting one, because the Uniform Holiday Act of 1968 initially attempted to turn it into a Monday holiday. And for most of the 1970s, well, from 1971, when the Uniform Holiday Act went into effect, to I think 1977, it was celebrated on the third Monday in November. But that outraged veterans, and actually veterans old enough to remember World War I. In 1971, that's only 53 years later, there were actually World War I veterans still alive. And it was returned to, and it is one of the holidays that's always celebrated on the date, November 11th. To this day. This is Memorial Day. It's Laurel Hill Cemetery. I just happened to take that picture this year. Erie. The newest national holiday is actually a very old holiday. It was made a holiday in 2021 when President Biden signed it into law, but actually it dates to 1865, and the first celebration of it was 1866, and most people would say the first official celebration was 1872 in Houston, Texas. What Juneteenth celebrates and acknowledges, and it's a major holiday in the African American community. It's a day of church-going, education, and picnicking, celebrating. It celebrates or acknowledges the day, June 19th, 1865, when the 13th Amendment and actually, it wouldn't have been the 13th Amendment was not yet passed. Abolishing slavery, yeah, no, it is passed. The 13th Amendment is passed Abolishing slavery finally gets to Texas when General Gordon Granger makes this announcement. It was General Order Number 3, headquarters. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights, rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing no longer exists. Freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. That's not what happened, interestingly enough. But it happens in June 19th in 1865 in Texas. The Emancipation Proclamation was actually in 1863, January of 1863. The 13th Amendment is abolished in 1865. The final formal vote by Georgia confirming that amendment hadn't actually occurred just yet. They passed it earlier in the spring, and the states were confirming it, but it does get confirmed in 1865. What actually happened is kind of interesting. The first thing that happened, well, there's 2 points I wanted to make actually before I talk about what happens. Neither General Granger's order nor Lincoln's proclamation outlawed slavery. This is what I was just about to tell you. That wouldn't happen until December 6, 1865, when Georgia ratified the 13th Amendment. You'd think that'd be one of the issues that 160 some years later, no one's going to talk about, but there are some, and I'm going to betray some of my politics. I try to be apolitical, but sometimes it's hard for me. I never fail to be astonished, but there are some people on the extreme right who say that that doesn't count because Georgia was coerced, because the southern states were basically told, you vote for this or you're not in the Union during Reconstruction. So they make this argument. You would think, well, whatever. Like the rest of the Confederacy, however, white Texans resisted Granger's order. They didn't accept it. And they rather quickly set in motion, I do a whole presentation on this in the American Tapestry Project, what's called the Redemption. The Redemption was, in fact, the white Southerners' overthrowing of Reconstruction and essentially overthrowing of the Civil War amendments to the Constitution. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. 14th Amendment, we're still arguing about it today. Birthright citizenship, and what exactly does due process of law mean? And they created what are known as, and the 15th Amendment, which gave, this is an interesting thing because it causes controversy with the women's movement, it gave black males, first time gender had ever been stated in the Constitution. It gave black males the right to vote. Well, that immediately set in motion the counter-revolution, which has come to be known as the Redemption, in which the white Southerners created black codes and Jim Crow, and reducing black Americans to second-class status, and that lingered on till everyone in this room, with about 4 exceptions, in your lifetime in the middle 1960s, well, it starts, actually the civil rights movement goes way back to the 19th century, but for most people of our vintage, the real important date would be 1955 and 56, the Montgomery bus boycott, 1954, Brown versus Board, 1955, 56, and Jim Crow. And again, you would think 160 years later, it's not an issue, but it is an issue. Well, still, okay? What happened, despite Granger's recommendation, which is all it could, I guess you could call it, in order to the freedmen that they stay where they were, they left. Many of them went to Oklahoma, many went back east, into the deep south, because that's where they came from. Fugitive slaves went in 2 directions during the Civil War. They went up the Atlantic coast, 3 directions. Up the Atlantic coast, up the Mississippi River, which later, when you get to the Great Migration, it's actually the same 3 patterns. Or, as Huck Finn and Jim do in Huckleberry Finn, at the end of the novel, they head out for Injun country. They go west. I always like, well, we don't have time tonight to explain where the word cowboy comes from. Okay, I'll tell you where cowboy comes from. Most cowboys, contrary to what you saw on television, were freed African, well, actually, they were African Americans who took their freedom into their own hands and left. But Texans, trying to put them back in their place, didn't call them cowhands, called them cowboys, even though most of the settling of the West, etc., was done by them. In any event, the scatter, what happened is people went looking for their relatives that had been separated from them. They went to Oklahoma. They went further west. Many went back east, which might have been a tactical error, but they didn't know that in 1865 because of the redemption. But others stayed where they were, and one of the results of that is in 1872 in Houston, 4 black men pool $800, buy 10 acres of land, and create Emancipation Park. It is the first, it exists to this day, the first and longest continuous state park in the state of Texas. And that is where the first Juneteenth celebration occurred on June 19th, 1872. It still exists. Juneteenth was a major holiday in the African American community. Quite frankly, probably pretty much of a secret to white Americans. Some might have known it. It first got some national attention when the Reverend Abernathy slated the Poor People's March to end in Washington, D.C. on June 19th. That 1968, that unfortunately got swamped, double unfortunately, got swamped by the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy Sr. I got to make that distinction now. Be interested to know what he thinks. Well, Robert F. Kennedy Sr. It became, the poet Maya Angelou, it became a national holiday in June of 2021. How do you celebrate Juneteenth? Pretty much the way Americans celebrate the 4th of July. You have picnics, you drink strawberry soda, you get together with family. The famous statement is, it's a holiday of celebration, education, and agitation. The best description of it I've ever encountered, but I'm sure there are better, although she's pretty good, is to read Annette Gordon Reed's book on Juneteenth, which she talks about. She's a great historian. She's the historian who wrote the Hemmings of Monticello. She actually grew up in Houston, Texas, and it's a fantastic combination memoir and history lesson that will teach you about it. Part of the education, though, and the religious overtones, they have their most well-known outside of the African American community. It's obviously well-known inside the African American community, is James Weldon Johnson's Lift Every Voice and Sing, sometimes called the Black National Anthem. James Weldon Johnson, it's his brother Rosamond. James Weldon Johnson's a pretty amazing guy. He graduated from Atlanta University in 1894. He founded the first black daily newspaper in the United States. He was the first black man admitted to the bar in Florida. He's the first black man to be the head of the National Association, the NAACP. He is a great lawyer. He was an ally of Theodore Roosevelt and a major Republican. It's interesting how the wheel turns. A major Republican political figure in the early 20th century. But more importantly, he was actually a great poet. He would be with, well, this is how English professors make a living, they argue. But he would be with Langston Hughes and a couple of other people, probably the foremost, Maya Angelou, who was on the screen a minute ago, the foremost African-American poet. And the most famous poem that he wrote, he's usually associated with the Harlem Renaissance. The most famous poem he wrote is Lift Every Voice and Sing, which his brother Rosamond set to music, celebrating the birthday of Abraham Lincoln. I'll let you read the lyrics, and then we'll hear. Just had a serious brain cramp. Winard's last name is not coming up. Who is the singer? Winard Harper. Winard Harper. I had to look at I don't like to look at notes usually, but Wynard Harper, who you just heard singing. How many people knew James Cagney could sing and dance? He was actually a good singer and dancer, but he's famous as a gangster. The 4th of July. Actually, the 4th of July is interesting for a lot of reasons. We've called it Independence Day and the 4th of July, but if we call it Independence Day, the question immediately comes up, well, let me go, I got ahead of myself here. John Adams, in a famous letter to Abigail, his wife, and he wrote this letter on July 3rd, which is important. At the risk of being a real pedant here for a moment, July 3rd is important because he wrote this letter on July 3rd, and he said, Independence Day will be the most memorable, Adams could be kind of stilted, most memorable epoch in the history of America. I'm apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as a day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. He was a Puritan. It ought to be solemnized with pomp, parade, shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfire, which is exactly how we celebrate Independence Day. But he was talking about July 2nd. Because July 2nd was the day the Continental Congress approved Richard Henry Lee's resolution of June 7th that these colonies are and ought to be free. On July 3rd, they had appointed a committee of 5, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Robert Livingston, and the guy Roger Sherman of Connecticut, to write what we would call a PR notice, a public notice of what they had just done. Jefferson essentially wrote it by copying George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Independence. And Congress met on July 3rd, the Continental Congress met on July 3rd to review the draft, and they edited at great lengths, much to Jefferson's chagrin. They cut everything out on the terms of the causes, the causes they used to justify rebellion, which almost no one reads, and you ought to actually read those because they speak to 21st century politics. It's the exact, not the exact same things, but very much the same. But they cut everything out about slavery because Jefferson tried to blame the entire institution. Jefferson may well be the most complicated man in American history. I'm not a psychoanalyst, but the psychological backflips he must have done, I can't speak to. But they cut everything out, and actually they edited, I'll talk about the line they edited in a moment. Then they met on July 4th to vote that they accept the proposed announcement. They didn't actually get around to signing the declaration until August 2nd. So the question becomes, how did July 4th become the holiday? And that's the day that was stamped on the document, that the document was approved. And at the end of the day, it's a quibble. I mean, at the end of the day, but it's kind of interesting. What isn't interesting, however, is, and lost in all of that, is what I call the American Creed. Now, I could get real heavy here, but I don't really want to on a beautiful summer night. But in America, if I cut the American tapestry in two, I would say all of American history is a struggle between two basic groups. Who the people are, who the members of the groups are, change over time, but they're arguing about the same thing. One side says, this is America, creedal America, and the other side says, no. And that's the argument we're having today. J.D. Vance says that's nonsense. That's a verbatim quote. I mean, so this is as fresh as you go. I do not watch television. I don't watch cable talking heads yell at each other. Actually, I get in an argument with Ferky sometimes about maybe the worst day in the history of the Global Summit was right after the election in 2024, and we had, well, they're big names. Fortunately, I can only remember Chris Matthews, but these people started yelling at each other on the stage in the prep gym. I don't watch that stuff. There are those who believe in this and those who don't. For example, sometimes Southern apologists will tell you the Civil War was fought because of economics. The rapidly industrializing North had gotten too powerful and too rich. No. The Civil War was fought over slavery and slavery only. That was it. Boom. And my evidence for that would be, read the secession documents of the Southern states. Read Alexander Stephens' Cornerstone speech. Alexander Stephens was the vice president of the Confederacy, who in his famous Cornerstone speech in 1861 said, he specifically rejects the Declaration of Independence, says it's a mistake, it's wrong, all men aren't equal, and he goes on and on. I won't get into the racist stuff, but you can look, this stuff all exists. The Declaration of Independence is the most famous part of it, the part that always gets quoted. Interestingly enough, on July 3rd, when the Continental Congress debated it, they did not discuss it at all. They spent all their time on the causes justifying revolution. Why didn't they discuss this? They probably just thought it was boilerplate. But they didn't think it was worth arguing about. It was Lincoln at Gettysburg who actually makes this the American creed. He at Gettysburg says, this is why we fight. This is what this is all about. It is probably, Walter Isaacson calls it the greatest sentence ever written. It is probably, no, Furky and I agree on this. Furky, sometimes you have to come here from someplace else to get at what makes, when we're on our best behavior, what makes America America, not when we're on our worst. He said, that is one of the most, maybe the most revolutionary political statement in the history of the world. Prior to 1776, 100% of the people in the world lived in what we would call authoritarian regimes. Today, with all of the turbulence in the world in 2026, about 75% or 3 out of 4 people in the world live on something, better or worse, some of them work, some of them don't, something that looks like a democracy that says its citizens have rights and government are created by the consent of the governed. And that's because of this. So you know where I come from politically, that's the America I believe in. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Jefferson had written, we hold these truths to be consecrated by God. Franklin, the ultimate man of the Enlightenment, said no. Anything that can be consecrated can be desecrated. Anything that can be given can be taken back. These are self-evident truths. They don't need to be proven. So that's the philosopher, the Scots philosopher David Hume's common sense philosophy. A self-evident truth is a truth that is linguistically self-evident. All bachelors are single. There's nothing to argue about. All bachelors are single. If you find me a bachelor who's not single, he's not he or she is not a bachelor. So a self-evident truth is a truth that is true, it's not open to argument. It's just, that was Franklin. That all men, and that, of course, some people would argue. I mean, the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments at the Women's Seneca Falls Convention in 1849 said all men and women, that all men are created, but they not only didn't mean women, they actually didn't mean all men either. They meant all white landowning men. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We've spent a lot of time arguing over that. At its basic, I would argue, self-evident fact, you're equal before the law. After that, it's a free-for-all, and anybody who tells you it isn't really paying close attention to how humans behave. But what it's saying is you are equal before. That is a radical statement, because in a monarchy, you're not equal before the law. In fact, there's a hierarchy. It's an existing one defined by blood. And that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. These are rights that can't be taken from you, that are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life makes sense. Liberty makes some sense, but people have argued about that. Pursuit of happiness is an interesting phrase. It doesn't mean the mindless pursuit of pleasure. To an 18th century person, it would have meant, to a literate 18th century person, it would have meant, I guess the best way of saying it might be, you weren't in the Army though, you're a Marine, but same thing. The old Army ad, be all you can be. The pursuit of happiness was you have the right to become whatever it is you have it in you to become. That's what they meant by that. They didn't mean let's have a party. They meant you have the right to, whatever it is that you want to be, you have a right to at least try to become that. Nobody can deny you that. I mean, practical reality, we understand. It's also, the historian Joseph Ellis says, it's actually a literary trick Jefferson played. Back to Jefferson, the most complicated person. The way you would read that in Scott's Enlightenment philosophy, they would have said, if you read your Montesquieu or if you read Hume, they would have said the three key rights are life, liberty, and property. Life, liberty, and the right to own property, because property was once, you didn't have the right to own property. All you have to do is watch British detective stories if you want to see the echo of that. The landowner, you have a right to be a tenant, but I own it. Why do I own it? Because 800 years ago, I had the immense good fortune that 800 years ago, my ninth great-great-grandfather happened to be the toughest guy on the block. Okay? I'm being facetious, but that's what it means. Ellis argues that Jefferson knew exactly what he was doing because Jefferson was a complicated guy, that he put pursuit of happiness because he knew if you put property in there, Southerners would then say they have a right of property and slaves and you can't deny them that. So Jefferson cut it, he put it in. Most historians think that probably it went by Adams and Roger Sherman and Livingston, but they think Franklin would have known what he was doing. Franklin, to me, is the coolest of America. I mean, he's just an amazing human being. And that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power, and this is the important line, from the consent of the governed. That's the most radical political statement you can argue in the history of the world. And that's what we stand for. At least that's what I think we stand for. How do we celebrate it? Pretty much like Juneteenth. You have a picnic, you have a parade. Not much education happens on July 4th, and I don't think much church attendance happens on July 4th either. But we have picnics and parades, et cetera, et cetera.
And the agitation is your neighbors doing fireworks.
Yeah.
And they haven't stopped this summer.
And the American Tapestry Project on QLN, there's at least in the American Tapestry on QLN, I think I actually do episodes 11 and 12, you can hear a history of all of this music. I just want to touch on a couple tonight. There's great patriotic music on every genre in American history. We just heard a sampling of them, everything from Stars and Stripes Forever, Julia Ward Howe's Battle Hymn of the Republic, which was the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And if you ever actually read the lyrics and listen to them, it's an extremely militant statement of human rights. And Woody Guthrie's This Land Is Your Land, which actually was Woody Guthrie's reaction to Irving Berlin's God Bless America. He thought Irving Berlin's God Bless America was a little too triumphalist. Guthrie was, of course, the poet and the singer of the poor, of the common man. As I said, I've done a number of those on QLN. How many national anthems have we had? That's Hail Columbia. My Country 'Tis of Thee, America the Beautiful, Yankee Doodle, God Bless America. And of course, the Star-Spangled Banner. For most of the 19th century, Hail Columbia, which was the little clip at the beginning, the first thing you heard was the national anthem. But after the Civil War, in an attempt at national unity, the Union kind of dropped it because it was offensive to Southerners, because it was actually the anthem of the North. And that's when America, My Country, 'Tis of Thee started a little bit. And then by the early 20th century, the Star-Spangled Banner, even though it's a difficult song to sing, a difficult song to play, some people will tell you it's not the most melodious thing they've ever heard, starts to get public acceptance. An early song that was a national anthem, kinda, was Yankee Doodle. Yankee Doodle is not a children's song originally. Yankee Doodle was originally a British Army drinking song mocking Americans. Doodle comes from the German word. Remember, they had Hessian mercenaries they brought with them, the British. Doodle comes from the German word Dadel, which means simpleton or fool. It also, actually last week at the Jefferson, the Hutchinsons, right? Hildebrands, that's right. Ginger Hildebrand was trying to explain as decorously as she could that Doodle also was an insulting commentary on American males' sexual organs. She was trying to do that as decorously as she could. I could do it more bluntly, but I won't. But what happened is, interestingly enough, the Americans took it upon themselves and made it their marching song, the Continental Army, and they just threw it back in the Brits' face.
Yankee Doodle went to town, riding on a pony, tucked a feather in his hat and called it macaroni.
People have wondered about the macaroni. Jefferson brought Jefferson, again, is an interesting guy. It was a lot of things. He was also a gourmet. He's the one who brought pasta to America, but they called it macaroni. And the Americans had this colonial, it was a kind of like the fad food of the late colonial era, and the British found that ridiculous. But also, Yankee Doodle was an army marching song. As I said, the Continental Army co-opted the British in reverse and made it an army marching song, and this is the U.S. Army Men's Chorus singing Yankee Doodle as a marching song. But, of course, you don't have to stand. The Star-Spangled Banner, everyone knows the story. I think you learn it in grade school. It's probably one of the very first things you ever learn about American history. During the War of 1812, the night of September 12th to 13th, Francis Scott Key is held prisoner on a British man-of-war in Baltimore Harbor because he had been part of a delegation sent by President Madison to negotiate peace terms with the British, but the British knew what they were going to do the next day, and they were afraid that Key and the others in the delegation had overheard orders or what was messages, and so they kept them on board the ship as they began the bombardment of Baltimore Harbor. And of course, Key got up, he probably never went to sleep, but when he went on deck in the morning, the flag still flew. And actually, the Star-Spangled Banner isn't a song. It is a song. It isn't a song. It's actually a garrison flag. And that's it. The Star-Spangled Banner is the garrison flag that flew over Fort McHenry. Key wrote a poem about it. A friend of his put it to music. And then a little interesting aside, and the Hildebrands talked about this last week, there weren't very many musical instruments in colonial America. She talked about how in rich families there was the spinet, which is a harpsichord, and then there was the fiddle, and then some simple, we called them recorders in grade school, fifes and flutes, thank you. But there weren't many instruments, and as a result, there weren't very many original compositions, original melodies. And in fact, the melody of the Star-Spangled Banner is actually the melody of the Anacreontic Society, which is a British men's amateur chorus club's theme song. That whoever took that music just took it and put it to Key's poem because the meter of the poem tended to match the melody from the Anacreontic Society. Most people assume the first verse, which has become the chorus, is the whole song. And actually, part of the Star-Spangled Banner became controversial some years ago. I don't hear this controversy argued much anymore, given the way politics has reversed itself. But the third and fourth verses were always some bit of thing. Key was an interesting person. Remember, you're in Maryland, you're in a border state. He was at sometimes an abolitionist and at other times a slave trader. He was a guy who played whatever side seemed to be winning at the moment. He's not the only person in history, so that's not a criticism, it's just a description. In any event, in the third verse, there's a band, so the battle is so important that it would intimidate. No refuge could save the hireling and slave. Hireling and slave is an interesting phrase. A hireling was a person who worked for wages, which upper-class white people considered a form of slavery. And Key was an upper-class white person. So that's actually an attack on working people. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. In other words, interestingly enough, Black Americans in Baltimore in 1812 had no skin in the game in seeing the Americans win, and if the British said they would free them, they went with the British. Not, in the long run, wasn't a smart move. Same thing for working guys, whoever's going to pay me the most. And that's actually the third verse. Most people never sing that anymore. They sing the first verse. If I were going to pick what's the national anthem, it would be America the Beautiful. It's melodious. It's also, there are no bombs going off. There's no wars. This is America at its best. It was written by Catherine Lee Bates. Catherine Lee Bates was a professor of English at Wellesley. And in 1893, she was teaching at Colorado College. And she and a group of friends hiked to the top of Pikes Peak. And she was sitting on Pikes Peak. And if you've ever been in the Front Range of the Rockies, if you look west, you're looking up. If you look east, it's flat, as far as you can see in any direction. She was looking at that, and she wrote in a diary that she saw all the beauty of America spread out before her. And so she wrote the poem, America the Beautiful, which was later set to music. Actually, whoever set it to music somewhat lost to history. But Catherine Lee Bates wrote America the Beautiful. And again, there's a little bit of a complication. Her first poem included God shed his grace on thee till past be wrought through wilds of thought. But God shed his grace on thee till selfish gain no longer stained the banner of the free. That got amended. She corrected it. Strike that verb. She edited it to get larger appeal. She was actually a women's rightist. You would expect that. She was also a labor activist. And she was also an activist for, they wouldn't have used the phrase civil rights then, but she was a civil rights activist. Her 1911 version is, my God, thy gold refine till all success be nobleness and every gain divine. She's actually saying the same thing, just a little softer. I think actually America the Beautiful should be the national anthem, and there's a lot of versions of it. I love jazz. This is my candidate for it should be the national anthem, and this is, I don't have the whole thing here, but this is the single best version of it. There should be music after that build-up. Oh, okay.
America,
He did this the first time ever on the Dick Cavett show. Most people forget that.
Success. Being nobleness. And every gain divine. You know, when I was in school, we used to sing something like this. Listen here. Look you to God, my spacious skies. My emerald waves of grain. My purple mountain majesties. Oh, the fruity plain. Well, now, wait a minute. I'm talking about America, sweet America. You know, God don't shed his grace on thee.
I'd like to play the whole thing, but thank you. Those are the freedom holidays. Any questions or comments? Yes.
Well, Erie Playhouse did 1776 this year, and I learned a lot, and a lot of things that came out of that production were parallel to what we were saying. You know, it was interesting how they portrayed Jefferson.
He's a hard man to portray.
Yeah.
It was, I thought it was really well done. It was not, but I thought it was really well done.
I didn't go to the play. I saw the movie when it was at, it was a bicentennial in 1976, and I didn't think much of the movie, so I never saw it. And I don't think anyone's ever argued that it's not reasonably historically accurate. I mean, Jefferson's kind of squired away in this small little hotel apartment room, you know, sweating. There's no air conditioning. Yeah, I think it was actually, I mean, it was a little bit overstated at times, but it got the basic ideas. You can't argue with them. Anyone else have a question or comment about any of this? Yes, Paul.
Yeah, you know, when I saw and mentioned here, and then when the Hildebrands were here, when I think of, I remember Lift Every Voice and Sing. That's the point I'm trying to get to. How down south in the schools, that was sang every morning.
Yeah.
Every morning. I never heard it called National Black
Uh-huh.
until people in the north started complaining about it. But it was just down there, it was just what they sang, and they just called it Lift Every Voice and Sing. But it was sung in all the schools.
Yeah, you're right. It's extremely well known. It's only recently gotten
Right.
known in the North. I mean, there's a real incredible irony there at times if you think about it. Anyone else have a comment or a question about any of this? Yes.
Juneteenth. Obviously, I didn't learn about it in school. The first time I ever heard about it was when I first went to college, and my roommate was from Texas. And then he educated all of us about Juneteenth. So over the years, I've been able to build upon my personal knowledge of it, and I find it offensive when our current administrative tries to abolish it.
Yeah, I find it offensive. Actually, I thought I was fairly well versed, and I only learned about Juneteenth in any depth in the last 7 or 8 years. And it was actually because a good friend of mine in Paul's, one day we were talking about this, that, and the other thing, and Fred Rush said to me, "Do you know what this is?" And I looked at him, and I kind of knew what it was, but I was stumbling around, so I said, So Fred gave me a lesson, and then I went and made it my business to learn more. But Paul and you make a good point. It was well known throughout the South. This is no surprise to anybody who lives in the South of the South, well, not entirely the Southwest, but Texas. And interestingly enough, in the so-called free North, it was the last place to get the message in some ways. That's
Same
true.
with, like schools and like segregation as well, right? Like they focused in the South during those years.
Yeah.
But then in the North, nothing was so documented.
No,
Which is odd too.
I count as one of the great things that ever happened to me in my life is I went to a giant integrated public high school. It was, even all those years ago, it was about 65% majority, 34% minority. There was Manuel Lopez and Eugene Wong were in my class. That was the Latino and the Asian, and the rest of us looked like me, or they're African Americans. And I'm not going to tell you if some of my friends were there, who are here right now, some of my black friends from high school were here, they would tell you there's no, I'm not trying to say it was some, although we were very good at sports, but that's a different story. As a matter of fact, we beat everyone, or almost everyone. In fact, I wrote a thing about that, actually, a whole book note about that, because we played as a team using all of our people. I'm not saying anybody was enlightened, it was just, in fact, I could write a book or an article about it. It was anything but enlightened in some ways. But but that was atypical. Yes?
Because our form of communication has transformed, especially with the internet, this 2-year delay in getting people the word that slaves were free would never have happened today.
Oh, no, no, you're right. We could go down a real rabbit hole. Media has changed everything. Communications, for better or worse, has changed everything. But you're right, that wouldn't happen it wouldn't happen today to people paying attention. I think we went from what you're saying, there was just information was hard to come by, to a rather common and generally available and more or less trustworthy source of information. Not entirely, I'm not naive about this. To now we have such a fractured source of, you don't know what, you've got to spend some time, and quite frankly, it's no problem. People work, they got things, I spent my life doing this, but other people do other things. They don't have time to track down which one of these 3 people actually knows what they're talking about. So the one with the loudest voice or the one with the cleverest patter. And if the one with the cleverest patter has the loudest voice, doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. So that's part of the challenge of our time. I think one of the worst things that happened in American history in my lifetime is the collapse of the daily newspaper.
Yes.
I can remember, just like anybody in this room, I might have said, oh, that damn Larry Cuntilla, what's he doing now? Or just go down I miss those guys. Because the newspaper, for the most part, tried to get it right. But there was also the common grounds. It was the community, everything. You asked me where to get walleye. By the way, somebody over here said smugglers, which is right on the dock. If you wanted to know where to go to a good fish fry, you would go to Showcase on Thursday and they'd have every place. Now you got to dig. And I actually have, whatever, I don't want to get political, but the loss of the newspaper is a devastating thing, actually. And we have not figured out how to create this. If this were the book about leadership, I'd talk to you about how I don't believe there's no such thing as a problem. There's only an opportunity in disguise. Well, this is a problem, and if there's an opportunity in there, I certainly haven't found it, and I don't know that anyone else has found it, but somewhere in there. I'm looking at the clock. If there's any other questions, I hope you enjoyed it. I didn't want to get too deep. I didn't want it to be superficial, but I didn't want to get too heavy on a summer night either. Probably came closer to getting heavy than, but, okay, well, thank you for coming.
Thanks, Amy.
Take care, Paul. Thank you for coming.